years. That's how long it's been since I first heard the siren from inside an ambulance. 12 years of night shifts watching the city reveal itself for what it really is: cruel, merciless, soaked in pain. In that time, I've seen death in every guise, from the blue faces of overdosers in dirty alleys to the mangled bodies on the pavement. After head-on collisions, blood has become as commonplace as morning coffee. Despair has become background noise. But the last few months, something has changed in the rhythm of my work. First alarm bells rang in October. I didn't think much of them then, just a statistical anomaly, a coincidence. Too often our team was sent to certain parts of the city, the eastern side. There are new high-rise buildings with panoramic windows and concierge in uniform. Not the most common place for our calls. People usually die there quietly in private clinics, surrounded by relatives and the best doctors. But now alarms were coming from there with alarming regularity. Falls from stairs, young, healthy people suddenly losing their balance on steps they had climbed thousands of times. Drownings in their own bathtubs, adults who could swim somehow drowning in 20 centimeters of water. Carbon monoxide poisoning. People whose gas appliances had been serviced a month ago found eternal silence in their own apartments. Each case looked like a tragic coincidence. The official conclusions were impeccable. Accident, accident, accident. But the numbers don't lie. And when I started keeping track of my statistics, analyzing the call records in a tattered old notebook, reality hit me with the force of an oncoming truck died. In the last 6 months, I have visited the death scenes of 23 people. 23 young lives cut short by what I assume were accidents. The victims ranged in age from their mid-20s to their mid-40s. All were healthy, active, with no serious medical problems. None were depressed enough to contemplate suicide. None had enemies who were capable of murder. And every single one of them died from accidents that, upon closer inspection, gave me the creeps. The voice of the dispatcher, Sarah Connolly, was especially disturbing. Middle-aged woman with 8 years of night work and an impeccable reputation. It was her voice that most often came over the radio when those damn calls came in. Low and raspy from cigarettes, it became a harbinger of trouble for me. As soon as I heard Crew 7, we have a code red, my heart started beating faster. I knew that today someone would not see the dawn yet. James, you're so paranoid, I told myself, sitting in the cab of my car between calls. Maybe the problem was me. Maybe 12 years of being a paramedic had finally cracked my psyche, and now I was seeing conspiracies where there weren't any. Maybe my fatigue, my pent-up stress was making me look for patterns in chaos. But my doubts dissipated each time I analyzed the details. The victims' medical records revealed another disturbing fact. All 23 people had visited the hospital in the weeks before their deaths. The reasons were trivial: routine checkups, mild colds, minor injuries, nothing serious. But their personal data was entered into a computer system accessible to the dispatch service. Addresses, phone numbers, medical history, contact information. For relatives, someone studied this data. Someone knew when the victims would be home alone, when they had meetings, what their habits were. Information becomes a weapon in the hands of those who know how to use it. The turning point came with a call at the end of January. The address was in an upscale neighborhood. On the 15th floor, elderly man fell from a balcony, Sarah reported. Her voice was familiarly detached, professionally cold. As my partner Mike and I raced through the empty night streets, I was already imagining the next tragedy. Edward Morgan, 62, retiree. Neighbors heard a crash and found his body in the courtyard of a high-rise building. The official version seemed plausible. The man went out onto the balcony to smoke, slipped on icy tiles, and lost his balance. An accident. But when we got up to the apartment, I noticed strange details. The balcony door was locked from the inside. How could Morgan go out onto the balcony? If the door was locked, the ashtray on the balcony table was clean, unused for weeks. And most importantly, the man was still alive when we arrived. He was barely breathing. Blood was flowing from his mouth, but his heart was beating. He was trying to say something. His lips were moving, making hoarse sounds. I leaned closer, straining my ears. They knew. He whispered and died in my arms, searching his pajama pockets for documents. I felt a folded piece of paper. The words, scrawled in pencil, made my blood run cold. They know when I'm home alone. I hid the note until the police arrived. The official investigation lasted 3 days and ended with the expected verdict, an accident. Edward Morgan became the 24th victim on my list. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, smoking cigarette after cigarette, thinking about what I'd gotten myself into. Morgan's note was proof that my suspicions were right. Someone was killing people, disguising the crimes as accidents. Someone was using the medical system to obtain information about the victims, and I was part of that system. An unwitting accomplice. The next few weeks were torture. Every call from Sarah felt like a death sentence. I began studying crime scenes more closely, looking for clues the police might have missed. I photographed odd details with my phone, wrote down inconsistencies in witness statements. Gradually, a picture of a monstrous conspiracy began to form in my head. The victims were not random. Each had a reason to die. Edward Morgan was a former City Hall employee who may have known about corruption schemes. Anna Petrova, who drowned in a bathtub, was a journalist investigating money laundering through charities. Mikhail Sokolov, who died of carbon monoxide poisoning, worked as an auditor for a large company and recently discovered falsification of financial reports. All of them were witnesses to crimes, possessors of compromising information, inconvenient people for influential figures, and all of them were eliminated by the hands of a medical system that was supposed to save lives. The darkness was slowly but surely consuming me. I knew I was standing on the edge of an abyss, but I couldn't stop. Every new death was a blow to my conscience. Every time I kept silent, didn't tell the police about my suspicions, I became an accomplice to murder. But what can I do? I had no hard evidence, only suspicions and strange coincidences. Who would they believe? An experienced dispatcher with an impeccable reputation, or a paranoid paramedic who sees conspiracies and accidents? Most importantly, I was afraid for my life, for my wife's life. If these people are capable of killing so sophisticatedly and remaining unpunished, then what will stop them from getting rid of me too? The darkness was drawing me deeper and deeper, and I knew there was no way back. Edward Morgan's note was the key that opened the door to hell. I understood the scale of what was happening. This was not just a series of murders, but a well-oiled system for the extermination of unwanted people. The medical database had become an instrument of death, and we, the paramedics, the unwitting executioners. I spent the next months conducting a covert investigation. I studied my colleagues' work schedules, analyzed call routes, and compared data little by little. A picture of a monstrous conspiracy, the scale of which staggered the imagination, was revealed to me. Sarah Connolly was just one link in a long chain. At St. Mary's, there was a doctor named David Clark who had access to patients' medical records. It was he who selected potential victims, people whose deaths could be of benefit to the clients. The information was passed on to the operation coordinator, the man who planned the accidents down to the last detail. The morgue employed a pathologist named Robert Stone who falsified autopsy reports. Violent deaths disappeared from his reports, giving way to accidental deaths. The police had their own people who ensured superficial investigations and quick closure of cases. The system was thought out to the smallest detail. The victims were carefully chosen, people who could harm influential figures, but whose deaths would not raise too many questions. The methods of murder were selected individually, taking into account the lifestyle and habits of the victim. The alibis of all participants in the conspiracy were ironclad, and I was the perfect performer, a paramedic with an impeccable reputation, who was the first to arrive at a crime scene and could discreetly destroy evidence or falsify testimony. My job was to make sure the victim was truly dead and the crime scene was free of incriminating details. This realization was a shock to me. I realized that in recent months I had not just been watching crimes, I had been actively participating in them. Each time, by silently accepting the official version of events, I became an accomplice to murder. But the worst part was realizing that my suspicions had not gone unnoticed. Sarah began giving me increasingly dangerous assignments, calls to remote areas where there were no witnesses, cases where a quick decision on resuscitation measures was required, as if someone was testing my loyalty or preparing me for final elimination. The turning point came in March when I realized that I had become not only a witness, but also a target of the system I was trying to expose. The work shift began normally. Mike told practical jokes, I checked the equipment. Outside the window, a nasty spring rain drizzled, turning the city into a gray, blurry mass. At 1:30 in the morning, Sarah's familiar voice rang out. Team 7, we have a code red. Possible gas poisoning, address Clenavia Street, building 47, apartment 12. Hurry, Clenavia Street, house 47, apartment 12. My address. I honed out. My heart started pounding so loudly that I was sure Mike would hear it. My hand shook as I picked up the radio. Sarah, repeat the address, 47 Maple Street, apartment 12. James, what's wrong? You sound weird. There was no sympathy in her voice, only cold professionalism and something else, barely perceptible notes of satisfaction. It's okay, I croaked. Got it, we're leaving. Mike looked at me in surprise. This is your address, James. What's going on? I don't know. I lied. Let's go faster. Cars sped along the night streets, and monstrous thoughts swarmed in my head. They knew where I lived. They knew my work schedule. They knew that I would be on shift that night, and Lisa would be home alone. Lisa, my wife, with whom we lived together for 8 years. She worked as a librarian, loved to read detective stories and bake pies on weekends. She never interfered with my work, did not ask unnecessary questions about why I had been coming home more gloomy than usual in recent months. Now she became a bargaining chip in a game whose rules I did not understand. We walked up the familiar stairs. The door to the apartment was open. The smell of gas hung in the air. The neighbor, elderly Mrs. Johnson, stood in the hallway and sobbed. I smelled it and called 911. Oh my God. It was horrible. Lisa was lying on the kitchen floor next to the gas stove. All four burners were on, but not lit. The official version seemed plausible. The woman was cooking dinner, inadvertently blew out the flame, did not notice the gas leak, and lost consciousness from poisoning. But I saw details that others would not have noticed. Lisa was wearing a dressing gown. She never cooked in a dressing gown, always changed into comfortable clothes. There were clean pots on the stove if she was going to cook. Why didn't she get the ingredients? And most importantly, she was lying facing the kitchen exit as if she was trying to get to the door but didn't have time. Someone made her inhale gas. Someone killed my wife and staged an accident. The next hours passed in a blur. The police arrived. Pathologist, the investigator. Everyone was polite, sympathetic, professional. No one doubted the accident, a tragedy that could happen to anyone. I kept silent. I kept silent because I understood that any accusations I made would be perceived as the grief of a father who could not accept the accident of his wife's death. I kept silent because I knew that if I told the truth, I would become the next victim. The funeral was small. Colleagues expressed their condolences. Sarah sent a wreath with a touching note. The system worked flawlessly even after killing my wife. She continued to show concern and sympathy. After the funeral, I returned to work. What else can I do? Sarah greeted me with a sympathetic smile. James, how are you holding up? If you need time to recover, I can arrange a vacation. Work will help take my mind off things, I replied. Looking into her eyes, she nodded in understanding. I read satisfaction in her gaze. The message had been delivered and understood. Now I knew my place in the system. The months became a nightmarish routine. Every call from Sarah was a reminder of what had happened to Lisa. Every new death was a lesson in submission. I had become part of a killing machine, a cog in a mechanism that turned medical care into a weapon of destruction. Gradually, I stopped resisting. Fatigue overcame indignation. Fear suppressed conscience. I learned not to notice strange details at crime scenes, not to ask unnecessary questions, not to save evidence. My professional oath to save lives became an empty phrase. The epilogue came exactly 1 year after Lisa's death. It was a March night, just as rainy and gloomy. Sarah's voice on the radio sounded like a sentence. Squad 7, we have a code red. Possible poisoning. Address 156 Park Avenue, apartment 23. Victim is a young woman, a journalist. Hurry, journalist. I already knew what I would find at the scene. Another victim of the system, another accident, another death on my conscience. But the worst thing was that I didn't care anymore. The darkness had swallowed me whole. I had become what I had sworn never to become, an accomplice to murder, a traitor to my own profession. The car sped along the wet streets towards another tragedy. I sat in the cabin and understood that my last call had been a year ago when Lisa died. Everything else was just a mechanical performance of a role in a play that would never end. The cycle was complete, and I became an integral part of it.